Aloha, y'all. You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to make everyone aware we launched a new website. It's www.thesustainableangler.com. You can find all previous episodes. We've got a blog going with some DIY sustainability tips, as well as fishing stories and things around the industry. And we also have some The Sustainable Angler merch. So if you like what you're hearing, give us a rating and review and pick up some TSA merch. All right. After that shameless plug, I'm excited to share with y'all today that Captain Chad Dubose is on the show. Chad's an old buddy of mine. We're both from Savannah. And today's episode is all about redfish, specifically in the state of Georgia, and what's happening with their regulations and limits. I learned a ton on this show. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, so just up the road, but we have different redfish regulations here, and it was pretty enlightening. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode, and thanks for listening. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is brought to you by Emerger Strategies. Choosing the right company to guide you on your sustainability journey can be difficult. You want to work with people you can trust, who have similar values and can help you achieve your sustainability goals. At Emerger Strategies, we are in business to protect what we love. We love our community, clients, and families. We are grateful for our public lands, rivers, and oceans. We are passionate about fishing and spending time in the wild, and we want to protect our home of Charleston, South Carolina from rising sea levels. If your company is looking for like-minded sustainability professionals to help your company measure and improve its sustainability performance, contact us today to learn why Garden & Gun named us one of the 15 people, places, and ideas forging the South of tomorrow. Please visit www.emergerstrategies.com to get started today.
Yeah, man. I grew up here in Savannah, Georgia. I've been in the quote-unquote outdoor industry since I was 16 years old. Just turned the lovely age of 37. Worked in various outdoor shops, climbing companies, fly shops. Got into fly fishing back in 2011 when I moved out west, and moved to Montana, became a fly fishing guide, and did that for about 6-7 years, and then decided to move back home to Savannah when I realized that I could kind of fish year round here, chase my local state redfish, state fish of Georgia, which is the redfish, and target them year round as opposed to being chased off by winter every year in Montana. So did that back in 2016, moved back full time, spent a few years kind of running the local fly shop, still do that. And, getting my sea legs back under me on the coast where I grew up fishing, and launched Tall Tides Charters, late 2018, early 2019. And I kind of run that part-time with a few other part-time guides along the Georgia, coast, and a little bit of the South Carolina coast as well. But when I moved back from Montana, I kind of, Montana is known for just having an incredible fishery, but also just good kind of sustainable wildlife program when it comes to wildlife in and out of the water. People really care about their fisheries and their water quality and stuff like that in Montana. And moving back to Georgia, I felt like with my experience and seeing the issues that I was starting to see being on the water more as an adult, it was kind of time to start, some action and trying to, work on the future of our local inshore fishery along the Georgia coast. And so that's kind of been highlighted over the last year with the Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association, starting with a Facebook page and just me getting on and kind of ranting a little bit about responsible fishing and sustainable fishing, and just trying to figure out how we can get the conversation started on how to work on bettering our local inshore fishing. And
so that's awesome. And thank you for that. And so let's sort of dive in. So you started Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association, and you mentioned this. We you and I we've talked about this. We've kind of lived parallel lives in some degree of being from Savannah both, and moving out west and getting into fly fishing. And you know, as I'm sure you can relate. And like you just said, you spend time out in national parks and on public lands, and people really they're really defenders of those places and those waters and the fish. And then you move back to Georgia. And so walk me through that. What are some of the things that when you came back to Georgia or Savannah, that you kind of noticed with redfish, and sort of how and why you started the Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association?
Yeah. So, moving back, I immediately became a member of CCA, Coastal Conservation Association, which anyone that grew up along the coast in Georgia or many other coasts, because it's a national organization, that's kind of always been after, conserving coastal, not just fish populations, but just coastal health along coastlines and whatnot. So there's a, sticker of a redfish with CC on it that growing up you saw on everybody's truck because it was a cool sticker to have. And so as soon as I got back, I was asked to join, and I did, and joined the board, and quickly, just for my eagerness, made my way onto the state board, and have been working closely with CCA over the last 5 or 6 years since I've been back in Georgia. And like with any, big nonprofits, there's a lot of things always on the agenda. But one of the things that I noticed was with fishing here as well was, looking at the number of redfish you can keep in Georgia per angler, per boat, compared to our other neighboring states, is, much larger. Florida, you can keep 1 to 2, depending on where you are in the state, with the larger slot. South Carolina, you can keep now only 2, with a slot that's pretty similar to ours here in Georgia. But yet we have one of the smaller coastlines. Now, North Carolina has 2 fish as well. But also per size of the state, we have the smallest coastline. So there's, a lot more people within our state traveling to our 90-mile coastline to fish. Specifically in our busier cities on the northern and southern tips of the state, Savannah and, St. Simons, Brunswick area. So being out of Savannah and starting a charter business and fishing here, and I do practice catch and release, but I also grew up fishing in Georgia, and have eaten plenty of redfish. And the big message here is, I don't think that we should not keep redfish. It's really just trying to evaluate where we are since the last time we had not even regulatory, but just change within our red fishing limits. Currently, there is a 5 fish limit with no boat limit and no guide limit. And that to me, that just seems like a lot of fish. Anyone that isn't even related to Georgia red fishing that you mentioned that to, whether you keep fish or not, that's a lot of fish. You can look at a lot of different things as reasons for being why we want to potentially change the red fishing. There's arguments on how to fix the problem. The big change we're seeing right now, I think, and what guides like me that have been doing this a lot longer than I have seen over the years, is kind of the depletion of our overslot redfish along our flats along the coast. And you could almost look at them as the canaries in the coal mine, because that means that we're potentially having a lot less fish make it out of the slot once they they're in the slot for a few years before they're able to grow out of it. So they're being targeted quite a lot. And if those fish aren't making it out of the slot, then they're not making it to become, breeders essentially. And our breeders can live for a very long time. And so it's kind of like what they talk about, the gap in the workforce with the baby boomers. Less people are having kids. So as we go through our lives, we're going to have less people in the workforce, but this society is still growing. So we have less people working, but a higher demand. And to me, that's what we're going to start seeing with our redfish is more demand in fishing, but we have less returning fish breeding and putting new fish back into our fisheries. When you get everybody on that same page, you could come up and in the same room to talk about problems with redfish. You could come up with a lot of different solutions on how to fix the problem, whether it's eliminate trawling for shrimp in the sounds, more enforcement on the water, regulating people and their catches, or dropping limits. But the big thing right now is to at least get everyone on the same page with acknowledging that we need to have some kind of change. The 5 fish limit was put into effect in 1991. It's 2022. The creel was adjusted in 2001. It's 2022. So to say that there hasn't been a huge growth of people fishing along the coast in those 20 to 30 years since there's been change, it's not arguable. And especially now, post-COVID, there are more people moving out of cities and moving to coastlines. They're moving to the water. There's more people fishing. There's more people outside. There's been somewhat of I think it's between like 600 and 700% growth along the coastline of Georgia, people buying saltwater fishing licenses. And that's a trackable number. So it's not a cry for help as much as like, hey, everybody just kind of look at what we're talking about here and see if this makes sense to you. Because right now it doesn't make sense to me. And I don't think I'm crazy for thinking that, because there's a lot of people that agree with me. But we're trying to get the people that can make that change to acknowledge that, regulatory change is not a bad thing. When you look at the immense diversity along our coastline, we have, I think, a third of the entire marsh grass along the eastern seaboard is in the state of Georgia in 90 miles. We should have one of the most thriving red fisheries along the coastline from Virginia all the way down to Florida. But if you look at how, when people are booking redfish trips in my industry, in the fly fishing industry specifically along the coastline, Georgia's not really the top of the list. South Carolina is very well known for its red fishery and its sport fishery. Florida is very well known as a sport fishery. But we don't seem to be managing our fishery, I feel like, in my mind, as a sport fishery as much as we're managing it as a meat fishery for people to come grocery shopping. And like I said in the beginning, I'm not trying to eliminate people being able to eat redfish. Like, I grew up on them. My dad grew up on them. My grandfather grew up on them. My grandfather was a charter boat captain down in Amelia Island back in the late 70s and 80s. My stepfather here in Georgia raised me fishing the beach for redfish. And a lot of the older guys don't understand the problem because they have their spots they've been going to for years and they can still sustain them. But, the ones that are out on the flats, those fish that are sight fishing that are somewhat the easiest to find are starting to disappear. And looking at the DNR, they do a report card every year. And last year they had a 40% return on stocks of redfish, which obviously is, you get a 40 in school, you're failing. But this year they had 100% return, and we did have a great fishing fall last year. There was a great return of fish entering the slot and being caught and reported on. And that's great. But if you look at the downward trend over the years of that cyclical back and forth of slow years and busy years, it's still a downward trend. And to do nothing is just, that's what we've been doing. And I think if we did something, acknowledge the problem, acknowledge that there's some kind of change that needs to happen, we could, better our fishery. We could grow our fishery. We could, look at the amount of money that our fishery brings to this state. And I think we could continue that and have more fish for our kids to be able to enjoy, and more profit for our state to be able to put back into our fisheries and make them more successful.
Yeah. And so there's several things that you brought up in that. And so first of all, it's, to not adjust, the regulation in 20 years when it's very obvious that the number of anglers has increased. And I didn't jot down the stat, but I mean, you can see it in the number of saltwater fishing licenses, the increase. So we know there's just without, any sort of, it's common sense. I mean, ultimately it's like, okay, well, if we're going to have more anglers targeting these fish, then at some point we're going to need to adjust how many they can take. And I'm with you. I mean, I'll eat a redfish. No problem. But at the same time, it seems very just simple math that, well, we can't keep taking this number when we're seeing this downward trend and return on stocks. And I think on a bigger scale, I mean, it's going to, guess what, folks? The world population is increasing and we have finite resources. So if we're not accounting for population growth, then we're doing future generations a disservice, in my opinion. But there's a few other nuggets that you threw out that's crazy. So Georgia has got a 90-mile coastline, but has a third of the salt marsh on the East Coast. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something like I'm not a huge numbers guy, but that it's something along those lines. I will also add into that we are building out a website right now. It's called georgiasaltwater.org. And that is where we're going to have, all of this information plus numbers, plus the very minimal science that is provided to us, that has been provided to us, to kind of show and explain kind of what we are talking about. But like you said, it seems like common sense. And the goal here is to not fault anyone. We aren't trying to say that DNR is not doing their job. We're not trying to say that, questions anyone's ethics or their ability to do their job. We're trying to say that as a group of regular recreational anglers and guides fishing along the coast, most of which have been doing it for a lot longer than I have, are seeing the change. We are out there every day, every weekend, fishing these waters, targeting these fish, which are our state redfish, our state fish. This is the fish that is you grew up in school learning about your state bird, your state tree, your state flower, your state fish, and it was something to be held with pride. So to think that this is our state fish, the redfish, and no other state that is better at red fishing than us even has that as their state fish. It is our state fish. Why haven't we put it up on a pedestal? Why have we, we did make it a game fish status, so you can't commercially fish for them in Georgia waters, which is, I think, a great step into protecting them. But like I said, when you have a 90-mile coast, but the size of our state, the amount of people traveling to the coastline to target these fish to then hopefully be able to bring them back, it's just astronomical how many people. And this isn't a fishing guide saying there's too many people fishing on the waters these days, now I have a hard time catching fish. It has nothing to do with me, because if the solution was for me to quit fishing, I would do it. But I'm a catch and release angler. I do not keep redfish. But we're still seeing these fish not return to these flats. We're still seeing these fish completely disappear off these flats. Sometimes within weeks, sometimes within a season. It's just like you said, it seems like common sense, but sometimes it feels like what we are saying is falling on deaf ears within the parameters of which we've been saying it for years. So that's why we're trying to get our voice out there and heard, to kind of spread the word and bring attention to this issue, to just shed more light on it and get more answers, and to be shown better and more in-depth science about our state fish.
Yeah. So a couple things we'll just have to throw this out there because you mentioned CCA, and I did the same thing. I joined the CCA board when I moved back to Savannah, and was on the board when we got game fish status.
Yep.
And what was really cool about that, and it seems to me what Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association is doing, was it's just bringing awareness to it. Like, I just don't think that most people are even aware of it. They just don't even think about it. And so once which is what y'all are doing, which is great, it's just like, hey, like, look, I'm just saying, call me crazy, but we can't increase the number of anglers and not adjust limits. Like, and to me, it makes a lot of sense. I know every state is going to have its own regulations, but if you've got a 2 redfish per boat limit in South Carolina, I think it's 6 in South Carolina per boat is the max you can keep, but it's 2 per angler.
Correct.
And similar regulation in North Carolina, and then a similar regulation in Florida. It doesn't just kind of seem like you would want to be consistent with that if they're people come to Charleston to redfish. Like they travel to come here to redfish. It's a known fishery. I grew up in Savannah. It's a great red fishery, but I don't think that people are coming there to target redfish. I might be wrong, but it's just not as well known, I guess. And I think, to your point, and there's a reason for that. It's because the stock's declining, and they know that there's better fishing elsewhere potentially. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah,
and then the counter to that is that to the people that do understand, because there is a growth, a movement, and you can ask any fishing guide along the coast that, I've had more inquiries for trips this year than I've ever had. All the guides I know are busier than they ever have. And it's because people have realized that they can come to this coastline and keep more fish. And you talk to a lot of the anglers. DNR put out a survey at the beginning of this year, a general angler survey to get a grasp on kind of public perspective. And, you ask a bunch of people right after a good fall fishing, how the fishing is, and they come to the state or come to the coast to fish with fishing guides whose job is to put them on fish. They're going to have a very good opinion on what the fishing is like along the coast in Georgia, because they just caught a bunch of fish. But it goes back to the lesson I learned when I was starting a guide, is anyone can be a good fishing guide when the fishing's good. And that's what it's like in the fall. People always ask, like, when's the best time to fish in Georgia? When's the best time to fish almost anywhere? In the fall. Right. You get cooling water temperatures, less people on the water. Fish are hungry. They want to feast before a long, cold winter. So whether you're guiding in Montana, down in Louisiana for redfish, Georgia coast, most fisheries are the most successful in the fall. It's the fish. People joke in Georgia that you can catch a redfish on a shoestring. It's not that inaccurate. But if we're only aiming to have good fishing in the fall, what could our fishing be like the rest of the year?
I think that it to me is just, I'm still like, can't get over the number of fishing licenses sold and the limit hadn't changed. I mean, I can't get past that. Like that's just still mind blowing to me.
Yeah. And to me, that's the best argument we have right now, because we don't own the science. DNR has science out there on their returning stocks. And I know they've been trying to work on a tagging program for overslot redfish, but the thing you can't argue is population growth. It's proven, those numbers are out there. And it's not saying that anyone has done anything wrong. It's just saying, hey, let's take a look at this and go, all right, well, if you had this certain amount of returning inventory every year, I brought this up earlier, and you had it allotted to this many people, but that many people grew by over 700%, you might need to start regulate how much of that inventory they're allowed to keep, so everyone could have somewhat of a fair share at it. And that inventory wasn't completely depleted. And so it's, it seems like simple math, and I know that it is, and it's, simple common sense, change. But the thing with, our local fisheries is that, what I've been told and what I know is that we are unique within our fisheries management in Georgia, that we can make change. They can make change. The people that are, working within the fisheries management programs can make regulatory change. And what's unique with them compared to other states is they can do it without having to go through the government. They can, they wanted to say tomorrow it's now a 2-fish redfish rule, they can. Their issue with that is that if they get a lot of public negative feedback from that, they could potentially lose that ability. But to have the ability and to not utilize it by any means is a waste. And so that's kind of a thing to shed some light on, is that we have the ability to make regulatory change with very little effort. But to say that we don't want to make that change because we're worried of the consequences of the change, that it seems like a bad excuse.
Yeah. Well, particularly when, the health of an entire fishery is at stake. Like, it's a short-term solution of, hey, we're not going to ruffle any feathers because we don't want to deal with the backlash from, the folks that are, catching their limit every time they redfish. And then, another 20 years goes by, and like you said, there's a downward trend. So at what point, is it, can it bounce back? And it's not going to if changes aren't made. So where you mentioned earlier, what's the new website and all that?
So the website is going to be launched soon. It's georgiasaltwater.org. But until then, we do have an Instagram page, Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association. We just created a Facebook page called the same. And then we have a email set up already called join us at georgiasaltwater.org. So for any inquiries, we've sent out hundreds of letters to legislatures, kind of showing our concern with the offer that anyone wants to get out on the water, and kind of, it's kind of hard to quantify what we're talking about and going out on the water for one trip. But to be able to get out on the water and see the water and see the environment of which we're talking about, and how, I used to guide in Montana, and I have people continually ask me, like, how did you leave that? And it's, Montana is a wonderful, beautiful place, and there's nowhere else in the world like it. But you come out on the water with me at sunrise on the coast of Georgia. There's not a lot of things that would beat what that is like. We have, within this, our city, we have a great tourism in Savannah. You're in the middle of a city right downtown, and to be able to, from 30, 45 minutes from the city, to be out in the marshes, away from civilization, with very little sounds of civilization, and be able to, fish in these remarkable environments. It's not a hard thing to convince someone how important it is to protect it. And that's the thing, is getting people out there, letting them know, like, it's not just going out and catching a couple fish and coming in. It's an experience to be had by all. And I'm concerned that experience is dwindling, and becoming, harder to attain when it comes to finding these fish and keeping them healthy, because they're a very small part in our ecosystem along this coast. When I created this, the main goal was to, and our main goal and only goal until we do implement change is to focus primarily on redfish. But they're not the only fish in our inshore fisheries, and they're not the only ones that need our help. They're the ones that we have identified, in my mind, and the people I'm working with, that need the most help at the moment. But it doesn't just stop there. It's the entire ecosystem, and they're a small but large part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I agree, and will completely dote on the Low Country and how beautiful and special it is here. And a lot of people don't realize that the state of Georgia, has a ton of, like, more or less the barrier islands from the state of Georgia are owned by the state and are protected. And so, I had a similar experience, and when I moved back from Wyoming, and we would go out on some of these barrier islands off the coast of Savannah, and there's points, like, we'd hop off and go on the beach and kind of just go, like, explore and walk around and stuff. And there's points that you get where you don't see any development, and it's as wild as anything in Wyoming, or Montana. I mean, there are places that are still undeveloped and more or less untouched from a development standpoint, that are out there and are on the Georgia coast. But to your point, there are more anglers out there, so you got to do something about it. And I think it's really cool that y'all are have started this. And who else is involved with Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association?
So, there are definitely too many people involved to name, because there's a lot of people involved that are, just regular either guides or recreational anglers that are just very impassioned and have actually been working on this for a very long time. But directly with the organization right now, it's myself, Jared DeVincent, down in St. Simons, Sue Inman with 100 miles, and then Captain Scott Dykes, who's down in Shellman's Bluff. But, Jared runs a local fly shop down in St. Simons, and is a incredibly wonderful, very impassioned angler. Sue has been involved in nonprofits, and getting voices out there for a long time. And Scott's been fishing this coast for 20 to 30 years, and has been trying to find a voice. And that's kind of what, when I started this organization, it was, there's Florida Keys has a guides association, and we looked at doing a guides association, but we wanted something that wasn't really inclusive to anyone in particular, and really anybody can be part of. So that's kind of what we're working on right now, is a pledge for guides to be involved. But anyone and everyone can be involved. And like I said, a lot of this did not start with me. I just saw my opportunity in my experiences and what I've been through, and also with what I'm able to do as far as making a profit targeting these fish, to be my responsibility to do something about it. And so using the platform that I have, my years of experience in the industry, as a way to be able to kind of make some of this come to light to people, is just, I feel like my quote unquote civic duty.
Yep. No, I wish there were more people and out there like you that are understand that, that there's that you should protect what you love and what you benefit from. And I think it's awesome.
And I think there are. I think the reality is there are a lot of people out there that that feel this way, but they don't have platforms. They don't understand. Their buddy that grew up in Savannah, known for a long time, that spent time fishing the Keys together, doesn't have an incredible podcast that is known throughout our industry. So, that's when you have that opportunity. That's when it's time for, us as anglers to be able to step up and to try to figure out how to get that voice out there. So it's, it's being able to work with incredible people. We just got a article published in Southern Culture on the Fly, an online fly fishing magazine that has close to 30,000 subscribers, about the redfish issue as well. A good friend of ours, David Chrisman, wrote it. It's just putting this to light. It's giving someone more information than they had before and letting them come to their own conclusion. We're not trying to say that this is our way or the highway. It's let's give you all the information and let you decide what you think is the right way to move. And, DNR's answer to this is for us to do what we're doing in all reality. When their science that they have does not show enough of an issue for them to make change, they do look to the public's opinion to make change. And so a few of us screaming at them at board meetings, which actually has not happened, to get change isn't how change happens. It's right. A few of us working together to get our word out, to say, hey, we think there's a problem. Who agrees with us? And then if we can get enough people that agree with us, that can look at the science and look at what they have and look at what we have and the numbers and make an educated opinion on this situation, then we have the potential to make change. It's not, like I said, it's not if they can come to us and say, nope, we've done all the science and here it is proof that there are just as many redfish as there were back in 1991 and there's no reason to make change, we'll shut up. But we do not believe that exists. We're willing to help with making that science happen, whether it's getting them out on the boats or showing them, they do have tagging programs in place. But other options too are looking at stocking programs. We don't stock in the state of Georgia, but they do in South Carolina. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. And instead of trying to get bogged down in all the solutions, because I think there could be a lot of different solutions and a lot of different opinions on them, we're trying to just get people focused on the fact that there is an actual problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, just be aware of this. Here's some information. I think it's a good approach.
Yeah. We're not trying to breathe an agenda down anyone's neck or anyone's throat. We're just trying to make sure the people that have been elected and put in place by the governments that we vote into place are being held accountable for what their job entails, just like we're all held accountable for what our jobs entail and the reason we are able to keep our jobs. And that's what we're trying to do, is figure out that, make sure that everything is being done that can be done to protect our fisheries.
Yeah. I love it. All right. So hang on, let's shift gears here a little bit. Right. Because, to me, like that's, it's inspiring just to see people taking action. So thank you for doing that. I know that like you said, there's a lot of other folks involved, but my hat is off to y'all. I did not know. I learned a lot from this. I didn't know some of that. I'm from Savannah, so I can imagine that there are lots of other folks like me. And so just shedding some light on this, I think, is really helpful. So thank you for that. But while we're here, right, it's the sustainable angler. We need to talk a little fishing. So, Chad, you and I have fished together. in the Everglades, and I don't know that we've gotten out on the water in Georgia yet, but I'm sure we will. But what are some of your favorite redfish flies, since we're talking about redfish? And then we'll sort of start there and go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So I run a local fly shop. And so that's a question that I get asked almost daily. What flies are the redfish eating right now? And the beauty of redfish, I remember the first saltwater fly fishing redfish film I ever saw was in, I think, like the 2011 fly fishing film tour. When they were fishing the Louisiana coast, and they kind of joke that redfish are kind of the gateway drug to fly fishing, because they're kind of looked at as an easier target. But I kind of look at it as they're not so much an easier target in saltwater fly fish, but they're the easiest they're the most widespread saltwater fish to target on fly. Target in general, but I mean, you can find them all along the southeastern coast, all the way into the Gulf to Texas. They're a fish that you can catch up to 14 inches. They're a fish you can catch up to 45 pounds. So there's a lot of variety in where you fish for them and how you fish for them, and the type of angler you can be to fish for them. So they are a fish that get a lot of love because they have a lot of love to give. They're a tough fish. You don't have to be gentle with them. You can catch redfish that have one eye. I've caught a blind redfish before. You can catch them with broken backs, talon marks all in them. They're a tough fish. But to say that, in the fall time, like I said earlier, like you can catch them on a shoestring when they're a typical fish, when they're turned on, it doesn't really matter what fly you throw at them. But when they're turned off, sometimes still doesn't matter what fly you throw at them, because they're still not going to eat it. But my general rule of thumb to this very long answer to this very short question is it's really more size of the fly and the color of the fly, as much as the pattern. You can make, as many rubber legs on there and, weight and heavy eyes, light eyes, that comes into effect a little bit. But for me, I keep two different types of flies in my fly box. I keep natural and purple. You can go in between there with a few other variations. Some people use olives and oranges in the fall. But my general rule of thumb is if it's sunny and clear water and the sky, sun's high in the sky, I try to go more natural patterns, a color that's not going to necessarily freak the fish out when it sees it. In the fall, it maybe not matter because they're so aggressive in general that as soon as I see it, they hit it. And then if I'm fishing early morning or late evening or murkier water or fishing in the grass, flood tide fishing, I'll typically throw a black and purple, something that's going to contrast really well, stick out, grab that fish's attention if it's busy feeding in the water and stuff like that. So to me, it comes down to a lot of color variation within either light and dark. But then another important fact to flies, especially fishing low country for redfish, whether you're fishing the grass around oyster rakes, is weed guards. It doesn't matter what color the fly is or what size it is or how much weight's on it. If you don't have a weed guard, you might as well not fish that fly, because you're going to spend more time getting that fly unhooked from the grass. The amount of times that you'll go to cast a fish and you'll go to strip and it strips into an oyster, and you've literally got to spook that fish to get the fly out, and ruin your shot. So weed guards are just as important as any other aspect of the fly. And anybody that doesn't know, weed guard is just a little piece of monofilament that drops down from the eye of the hook to kind of protect the fly from being caught on various things underwater.
Yeah, that is solid advice if you're trying to come to the low country to redfish, especially with the weed guard. Impossible. Like, that's just not going to happen. Well, I know you get around a little bit too. Where have you been recently? Any fun fishing trips?
This year I've only been to, I went fish New Orleans in February with Captain Greg Deeney. people like to laugh a lot that a red fishing guide in Georgia travels to New Orleans, but New Orleans is kind of the Montana for redfish. You can catch trout in Georgia, but if you really want to test your skills as an angler, you're going to go to Montana and fish true wild, open water for bigger, nicer trout. And the same reason you go to Louisiana, it's fun just to go catch big fish and on big flies sometimes. I was really fortunate back in 2013. I was able to guide down in Patagonia, and then spend a little time guiding in Asheville. I'm going to St. John in a few weeks to go do some fishing down there. Hoping to get into a little bit of tarpon. And then, right now we just had the Cobia Fly Invitational up in Beaufort. We just fished, which was a very tough tournament. It's a sight fishing inshore cobia tournament, which is a very, very unique thing. But sometimes conditions lead to terrible fishing, and that was a perfect example this past weekend. One thing I started now 5 years ago is the Savannah Fly Invitational here along the Georgia coast.
Yep.
And so this will be year 5 of that. It is an invite-only fly tournament. It's the only fly fishing saltwater tournament in Georgia. It's the goal with starting the tournament was more to just have a reason to invite a bunch of my friends to come fish a tournament together and get a bunch of cool prizes from throughout the industry and kind of celebrate what I think is a pretty unique fishery along the Georgia coast. From the beginning, I've been trying to find an organization that I wanted to work with to be able to raise money. And there was just not one that I felt like what I wanted to give the money for, which was to essentially do what we're doing with Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association, to be able to give them money to help fight that fight. And so that's kind of where the idea of the GSA came out of was, okay, well, I can't find anyone that I want to work with specifically on this problem that I know that it'll definitely go towards that problem. So let's do it on our own. So this will be the first year that, any proceeds from the tournament will go to that. And that's going to help, fund this website, fund, these events that we're looking to put together along the coast to kind of bring awareness, get people out on the water, send out letters to legislatures. We've all started what we've done now on our own and out of our own pockets, and from logo creation to website design. Fortunately, Jared has a social media company, marketing company. So he has incredible assets at his disposal to be able to get a lot of this stuff done. And with our connections in the industry, we've been able to reach out and get a lot of help from people, but it's not a cheap endeavor. We're definitely not asking for money, but we definitely have people that have already inquired about how they can get involved and help. And that's kind of where we're moving forward to, and being able to kind of create and grow this into something that's actually able to be to show growth and make change.
Yeah. Well, I think it's awesome. And I'll also say, having been fortunate to have been invited to fish in the Savannah Fly Invitational, that tournament is so fun. And I also like, just because obviously the sustainability component to it all, it's more or less a zero waste event, which is cool. And like I don't know what you call it, if it's the after party, but more or less the award ceremony and Low Country Boil and all that, is zero waste. There's reusable water bottles and coolers. And so I'll just say that I personally appreciate that. It's a nice touch to it. But yeah, I mean, I just think that more, just in general, right? Not just with what Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association is doing, but anything when you're passionate about it and you're protecting something that you love and you're taking action, at the end of the day, it just feels good. And so you know that you're motivated and you're doing it for the right reasons, and it's what is best for the fishery. And I think that anyone who travels to Georgia to fish or lives in Georgia and isn't aware of this, I would definitely encourage you to check out Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association on Instagram, Facebook. Sounds like the website's coming out. It's going to be georgiasaltwater.org. What else am I missing, Chad? How can people get in touch with you and learn?
We have one of the cool things is myself. I run Rivers and Glen Trading Company in Savannah. Jared, who's essentially the vice president of GSAA with me, he owns On the Fly Outfitters in Brunswick, just outside of St. Simons. So feel free to stop in any of their shops. We have Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association stickers to hand out to people. Love to have open, honest conversation with you guys about, any questions you may have. You can email us at joinus@georgiasaltwater.org. My personal email is chat@talltidescharters.com. But there's one quote that Fly Lords posted on their Instagram the other day from Chris Wood, who's a CEO of Trout Unlimited, that I think is a very good quote. And it says, it took a dedicated group of people at the local level to turn those issues into a national issues. And then they never gave up. And that was him talking about how the creation of Trout Unlimited started. And that's all this is. This is a group of anglers, whether they're guides or regular recreational anglers, that see the problem, see that there is potentially somewhat of a solution that could be come to. And we're just trying to get that acknowledged and get the word out there and have good, open, and honest conversations about it and how to move forward.
No, that's awesome. Well, Chad, I appreciate everything that you're doing, and appreciate everything that Georgia Saltwater Anglers Association is doing. And yeah, thanks for your time, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
Yeah, brother.
Thanks for listening to The Sustainable Angler, and special thanks to Captain Chad Dubose for all he is doing to protect what he loves. If you like what you're hearing, it really helps the show out a lot if you could leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, don't forget to check out thesustainableangler.com for all of our episodes, our blog, as well as some TSA merch. Thanks, and hope you all have a good one.